I grew up here. I went to Watson High School. I'm full of emotion because that's my home. I'm back home. This is my home. My people are here. My sister is here. My sister Margaret is here. My sister Dell is here. I grew up in Las Lomas. I graduated in 1969. I went to San Francisco State and basically, made a life in San Francisco. But I always knew that this is my home, and I got back and forth and all that. So, and I'm really excited about the exhibit. It's really an honor to bring the work from the artists that I know and my peers and my friends and share it with you guys. I mean, that's how I'm feeling. It really feels good. I mean, I'm crying because I'm happy, and I love it. And also today is really an important day in the history of Chicano movement because in 1970, the Chicano moratorium happened in East Los Angeles, and so it's significant that we're here on the 29th and we're doing this talk, right? I'm not an academic and I'm not an art historian and all that. So what I did is I actually, I had to go back and, I know my history in terms of what I did and why I did it and all that, and how I was connected, and also with Michelle. But I had to kind of go back and say, well, wait a minute, when did this happen? It's been, I'm 65 years old now, so I don't remember everything. So I had to write down some notes. But it really was the moratorium as one of the facets of what happened, and kind of set the stage, because it was during the moratorium that Chicanos from East Los Angeles, and thousands of them came out. It must have been 30,000, 40,000 Chicanos that came out, and really they were protesting the Vietnam War, and they were protesting the conditions in the schools and all that, and they went out, and 3 people were killed there. And most people don't know that there were 3 people that were killed there, but there was a young woman and a young man that was killed, and Ruben Salazar, the reporter, was killed there. And it was Ruben Salazar who, there's a quote that he said, a Chicano is a Mexican-American with a non-angle image of himself. And I thought that was kind of it kind of describes, who we are. It's like, yeah, we're Mexican-Americans, but we are Chicanos, but we have a non-angle image of ourselves, because that's who we are, right? So anyway, that's kind of what I kind of wanted to start with, just to commemorate or to talk about the Chicano movement a little bit. My notes are all over the place, but I took, of course, one is in the front and then 3's in the back, but okay, hold on. Everything's mixed up. But I took some of the information out of this Latin American poster book, and our good friend Terry Romo, who's an art curator, she's the one who basically got, like, myself and Rupert Garcia, Malaquias Montoya, and I think there's something by Esther Hernandez, and also Javier Miramontes, who's also in the show, and Esther is also in the show. But because we were involved with the Chicano movement, we were involved with doing political posters, when this exhibition came out, and it's an international exhibition on Cuban posters, they included the 4 Chicanos that had been doing posters, had been doing political work. And so some of the quotes and some of the information that I got came from this little fabulous book of artwork and Cuban posters, and we'll talk about the Cuban Revolution a little bit, because it was really significant to not only the Chicano movement, but to Chicano poster makers and Chicano artists. Okay, but I want to back up a little bit, and I want to talk about the term Aztlán, because the term Aztlán, it was a term that came from the Aztecs, right? And all of the Southwest, basically, was considered Aztlán, right? So there's no borders. There were no borders. So you see people coming back and forth and all that. and all this insanity about immigration and all that. This was Mexico. This was part of Mexico, and the indigenous peoples came back and forth. And Aztlán is a Nahuatl term, and it was a kind of a mythical area, but Chicanos took that concept and said, "We're in Aztlán. This is Aztlán. This is our homeland, right?" Sorry. Anyway, so that's where we're at. We're home. We're not. Nobody's crossing any borders. There's only borders because there's walls that have been created. But this land was taken, and we know that. Everybody knows that. So it's like when we talk about why there was a Chicano movement, or why people, fight for immigration and all that, because we have a right to come back and forth. We always did. Our people always crossed these borders, way before, the Spaniards landed, in Mexico, right? So, but anyway, that's what I wanted to say a little bit about it. And it was, let me see. So about the early struggle in the '60s, basically. The Chicano movement basically grows out of the civil rights movement, and we can't talk about the Chicano movement without talking about the black struggle and the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement is the one that led to us actually wanting to express what inequalities that we need to fight for, right? And it inspired the Black Power movement. Basically helped inspire the American Indian movement, the women's liberation, gay rights, and the Chicano movement. So anyway, I kind of wanted to say that, and there was a book called Occupied America by Rodolfo Acuna, who talks about the conditions here that resulted in the Mexican-American War, basically, of 1848. And that's when our homeland was basically invaded and things were taken, right? So we become, these, an alien culture and an alien language. That's the word alien. That's where it's alien. We're not alien, and people that come here are not alien. They're undocumented.
I know some are alien.
Oh, yeah, well, he looks at the stars. But anyways, that's just to kind of lay it out a little bit in terms of defining it, right? And so anyway, I just wanted to say that. I don't want to say too much more because it's there's a whole bunch of historical stuff that I wrote down. And I think it'll come out in the conversation instead of I want these guys to talk a little bit. We'll keep delving into this thing.
So one of the things that I've been fascinated with is Juan's work long before I met him. And the idea, I guess, for me when we were talking about this thing about conversations is also the personal stories, because there's personal stories that are tied to every one of these things. The fact that Juan was in that book and that collection of posters ties into something that all three of us were related to, and that was the Venceremos Brigade. And so early on in those days, in the early 70s, we all participated at different times. Michelle was in the 1st Brigade, and I hadn't seen her in about 30 years until I went to their house. We stayed to see about some work, and it was amazing. We've known each other for all that time. And then you're talking about the Chicano moratorium. And we know that was a foundation for a lot of other radical things to begin to take place. But there are other personal stories, and I was talking to my wife on the way here. And a lot of my family have come out of the Teatro Campesino. We had a group called Flor del Pueblo, music group, and different cultural work that we were doing. And so I have sisters and brothers and cousins that are on the stage at the Chicano moratorium. My sister was 12 years old at the time, my youngest sister. And the police were astounded by what was going on. And they could not breathe or understand why there's 25 to 30,000 people in that park in East LA. Because the whole idea of police brutality meant nothing to them. They were the ones who were inflicting it. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is to go to YouTube. Visuals, I think, are very, very strong. Right? Some of us are involved in the Watsonville Film Festival, which is something else I would really like you to please take advantage of in March. But if you go through YouTube, you'll be able to take a look at the 40th year anniversary celebration of the Chicano moratorium. And in that, you're going to see some footage that's pretty astounding. It's like you were looking at Selma, because that's exactly what East LA was like. But these pockets of this kind of brutality, of this kind of consciousness, we were just talking about this earlier, were all over the Southwest. They were in San Jose, they were in Watsonville, they're in San Francisco, it was Los Angeles, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, all of what is called Aztlán. These, the impetus for the ability to be able to say, yeah, that's enough, ya basta, for us was based in two things. One was the farm workers movement, 1965, and the Chicano moratorium in 1970. And so that, out of that grew things like the Teatro Campesino, which at that time was doing a lot of political work, but depending on people like Juan and Malaquias and Jose Montoya and Coco and different artists to be able to design the kind of things that we needed to put those ideas out visually for people to see. The posters. I think a lot of you have seen that poster of Sandino. Do you remember the poster of Sandino? That was one. Rigoberta Menchú, that was one. So a lot of us have seen Juan's work without knowing what he's been doing for all these years. And so, you know, the idea of looking at the Chicano moratorium, for me, it's also personal. I was in Boston. I had been sent out on the boycott because I was working for the Farm Workers Union. And we're sitting in a room because we had one television, and we're watching on television. We're watching what's going on in East LA. And there's my sisters and my brother and people getting blasted all over the place. We were talking about a young man who had just come back from Vietnam. When he saw this, he'd been working with our family, rounded up all the girls, the aunts, the sisters, the cousins, and took them to a firehouse and had them deposited there so that they were safe. And then he went back and he got all the musicians and the actors and people he could round up that he knew and brought them to the firehouse. And at the same time, it was madness out there. And you're watching this on television. It's just like we watch Selma on television. We watch Vietnam on television. These were all part of what our makeup is as, not only as Chicano, but as human beings, and especially of this generation. So, tying those kinds of things in, those stories, you know, we're talking about the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s, but Richard Vasquez, who's sitting here, his father was a Pachuco. His father and my father were Pachucos together. They were best friends for most of their lives, well over 60 years. Zoot Suits, the Zoot Suit riots, they hung out together with Cesar Chavez, but everybody's got a Cesar Chavez story. Everybody hung out with Cesar Chavez. Luis Valdez, I think he's related to Cesar Chavez. It's just like everybody in the Chicano movement has a Pancho Villa story. Last weekend, one of my wife's nieces was over, and she was telling the story about their grandfather. And the story that she had heard is her grandfather had ridden with Pancho Villa. Marge's story was that her grandfather had joined the Federales to chase Pancho Villa, and once he got to the border, he took off and came to this side. He was just using that as a vehicle to get across. He never rode, he was trying to catch them, supposedly. So everybody has their stories that are connected to those things. But that's what makes up his history. His story, her story, that's what makes up that piece.
Also, there was leadership, I think, that, I mean, just to acknowledge the leadership during that time, and like we said, Reyes de Herina was organizing, you know, folks in Nuevo Mexico, because really there were land grants. There were land grants in New Mexico, in the Southwest, that were, the Spanish government had given to the people that were there, but those land grants were taken away. So,
You cut that out of the...
so Reyes Tejerina was one of the leaders that basically organized people to, there we go, to fight for those land issues and all that, right? And then Jorge Rodolfo Gonzalez started the crusade in Colorado, and then that's another leader. And then in California we had Cesar Chavez and we had Dolores Huerta connected as well. So those were the leaders. Those were the people that we had in leadership. And then for myself as a young Chicano, because when I left Watsonville, I was pretty naive in terms of like, I didn't really know that much about even the civil rights movement. I get to San Francisco State in 1969, and there's demonstrations going on there. And the reason why there's demonstrations, that's why I got there. If the struggle hadn't been going on at San Francisco State to bring people of color into the schools and to create a relevant curriculum and to hire people of color to teach, I wouldn't have gotten that education. But when I got there, I got a slap in the face, because I get there, not only was I not prepared, but I also, this struggle's going on, and I'm like, what's going on over here? Like I thought it was all peace and love. I came to San Francisco, but I had long hair. I was a Chicano hippie. I was not. I was a revolutionary. I went there because of the music and I could get away. I could get away from the fields of Watsonville, and the girls and whatever. But it was like, and then I get there. I'm peace love, man. But I get there, and then they're like, the cops are like lined up out there. The police were out there, and there were demonstrations that were going on. In fact, one of my friends that went to Watsonville High School as well. There's three of us that went from here, from Watsonville High School. Rick Jaime and Tony Aceves and Victoria Mercado. And we were in a demonstration, and there was in the crowd one day, and the police were all over, and somehow there was a policeman in the crowd that was infiltrating the crowd, and they pointed him out, right? And then I was there too, and I was like, oh hell no, man! So I went and grabbed a big thing of mud, and I just threw it right at this guy, and everybody chased him out. And then the cops came, but people just surrounded me, and then I got away. But Tony, he was eating an ice cream. Tony from here, from Watsonville, was on his way back to the dormitory, and he has an afro. My hair was going this way, and his hair. He got arrested, was down at 850 Bryant, and was because assaulting an officer. He was a Chicano. It didn't matter what he didn't even look like me. It was like, come on, man, this guy has an afro, but he's the one that got arrested because of my. But I was the one that was my militancy. I was like, wait a minute, this ain't right, So that happened, and that kind of that's where things popped up, and it was Rupert Garcia, who was he wasn't my first art teacher there, but he was my first Chicano art teacher or professor, and he had been doing posters for the strike, the San Francisco State strike, and of course we bonded, and I became a student, and I became a roommate of Rupert's, and Rupert becomes one of the premier Chicano poster makers, along with Malaquias, and it was around the time that I met Malaquias. Malaquias was teaching at UC Berkeley at that time. And then after that, it was like, because I was in the art department and I was going to be an artist and all that, and I was like, but it didn't make no sense until I met up with Rupert and Malaquias, and then all of a sudden I had a reason to make posters and to make art. It was actually connected to a social movement and to something that we could actually address around issues that were going on. So that's kind of my part of my little story about how I got involved with that, because I was really kind of, like I say, I wanted to be a hippie. And I just wanted to have a good time and, you know, smoke my pot, leave me alone. I'm not going to fight anybody. But anyway, but it really got me thinking about the Vietnam War and then becoming involved with the Third World Coalition Against the War, which was the first coalition of people of color that were protesting against the war. Because we went through the big, huge demonstrations against the war in Vietnam, and Gary Street would be like packed with like 100,000 people. But it was mostly an Anglo movement. There were people of color there too, but it wasn't until the Third World Coalition, and it was a small coalition, but that got me, I got involved with that, and then it, you know, I couldn't stop after that. I'm gonna let Michelle talk, because I know she's got